afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. It's great to be here with all of you. Before we get started, I'd like us all to take just a quick second to thank the CodeMotion Amsterdam organizers for bringing us all here today. I was just tweeting earlier, you know you're at a really great conference when it's actually sunny in Amsterdam and people are inside watching the talks. So big thank you to all of them. So I have been working in the tech industry for the past 16 years, and my passion has always been around not necessarily the bits and bytes, but the human element in development. How do we make ourselves and our teams most successful while we're building the products that are going to be used by ourselves, our loved ones, people we've never even met, and the tools that are going to shape the future discourse and future evolution of our society? How do we make those interactions as positive as possible so that the end result is as positive as possible for our end users? And I think that the most important aspect of that is empathy. And I'm really passionate about this particular topic because I have worked in a number of organizations and on a number of projects where empathy was not a core value. And I have to say, I exited those projects relatively quickly because if folks are not focused on making sure that everyone has a positive experience, your time and energies are best spent elsewhere. So, why empathy matters? I think first and foremost, it's important to make sure we have a mutual understanding of empathy. Empathy is the ability to use an idiomatic phrase, to put yourself into someone else's shoes, to imagine their experience and feel it as if it was their own. So a relatively simple example, I can have sympathy for a friend who has food poisoning because I too have had a stomach ache and not felt well, but I will have empathy for that person if I have also had food poisoning, right? So the act of empathy is viscerally being able to feel what someone else is feeling, to share that experience. And empathy matters in absolutely everything that we do. Without empathy, we cannot create useful tools and products because we are unable to put ourselves into the shoes of our users and understand what they're going to do with the things that they create. Without empathy, we can't understand what our colleagues need from us as part of our team interactions, which means that we're going to have more bugs, more failures, more late nights, and a lot less angst at work. And without empathy, we're not actually going to be able to function effectively in terms of understanding ourselves and our own needs, because empathy starts with us, with the individual, and being self-aware. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit, but I think it's easier to understand empathy if we look at an example of empathy being completely non-existent. If you Google bad design, you will be shocked at the number of photos that come up of restrooms, or excuse me, we're in Europe now, I can say toilets. Take a look at this photo. So in order to use the sink in this toilet, you need to reach under a metal ledge and scrape your knuckles to turn on the faucet. Then to turn off the faucet, you have to bump your knuckles again on this metal shelf. And then when you want to use a paper towel, your paper towel immediately spills right into the sink, getting wet, making you unable to actually dry your hands. And to add insult to injury, if you need to use a tissue to wipe your nose, you have to reach all the way on top of the paper towel dispenser when there's a perfectly useful table right there where the tissues can sit and not get knocked into the sink where they'd become wet. This is a very poorly designed user experience. It's just terrible from start to finish. And the reason that these poor user experiences exist is because no one actually thought about how this was going to be used. Somebody thought they needed a sink, they needed a paper towel dispenser, and maybe they need some tissues. So when you are going about the process of designing any experience, be it your experience with your colleagues or the experience of the users of your product, design with empathy in mind. And I also think it's very important to realize that I'm going to spend a lot of time in this presentation talking about having good interactions with your colleagues, good interactions with teams, making sure that your users have a really positive experience. And that's all wonderful. And I would hope that innately everyone would recognize the value of empathy. But that's not necessarily true. Empathy is also very much about you, the individual. People who are empathetic are much more effective communicators, which means that they are much more likely to get what they want out of interactions. People who are exercisers of empathy are much better negotiators. So when there comes a time of conflict or a time to need to persuade people so that your opinion is acted upon, those who exercise empathy are much more likely to succeed. So being empathetic helps you to exercise enlightened self-interest. So empathy is a choice. Some people think that empathy is just something you're born with, and you have it or you don't, and that's not true. We can choose to be empathetic. There were several studies conducted on empathy, and these were actually written up in the New York Times mid last year, 2015. And the studies are linked in the slides if anyone's interested in geeking out about them. I know I am. And one of the findings from some researchers was that if people are given a choice to put themselves into a situation where they will be forced to display empathy, but there's nothing that they can do, they will avoid the situation entirely because they simply don't want to experience empathy. So if we look at that as a reductive example, if you can choose not to be empathetic, you can choose to be empathetic. Another point that researchers found was that folks were much more likely to behave in an empathetic manner, to display kindness, to display a concern over other people's experiences if they were told that empathy was a choice, that they could choose to be empathetic. So again, this is not an innate skill. If you aren't quite sure what all this empathy stuff is about, and you don't really understand how you're supposed to display it, and you don't really understand what all the fuss is about, that's okay, because it's something that can be learned. And we're going to talk about some tips for doing that later in this presentation. The first step in the process of understanding empathy, again, it starts with the self. It's about self-awareness. Look at how you react in particular situations. Why do you have the reactions you have? What is it that particularly is frustrating to you? Why is something particularly enjoyable for you? We go through our daily lives busy, hurried. We have many things that are expected of us, and very often we have reactions that we aren't even aware of. And because we're not even aware of these reactions or where they're actually coming from, we can't be self-aware, we can't be analytical. And without taking that time for self-reflection, we can't actually grow as individuals. We don't know what's motivating us, we don't know what's actually helping us be successful unless we take the time to meditate on that and be self-reflective. So again, empathy is something that you can learn, and it starts with self-awareness. So, concrete tips for building empathy. Step number 1, practice active listening. Active listening is a core component of a practice called nonviolent communication, which was actually developed as part of attempting to achieve peace in the Middle East. And the idea of active listening is that it will remove cultural and learned barriers to exercising compassion for one another. So things that we have been taught that keep us distanced from other people are removed through the process of nonviolent communication. And active listening is simply the process of taking away the idea of active hearing, right? You've heard the phrase, just sitting around waiting for your turn to talk, right? If you're just sitting around waiting for your turn to talk, you're not listening to what the other person says, you're waiting to make your point. You're missing the importance of what they have to say. You're missing the opportunity to learn from them. So the process of active listening is take in the information that's been presented to you, and this is going to be both verbal and nonverbal, right? If someone says to you, yeah, I'm having a great day, how are you? They're probably not having a great day, right? That's very defensive body posture. So take in verbal and nonverbal cues and mirror that information back to the person that you're talking to. So, Leslie, you're telling me that you're having a great day, but it looks like maybe it's not the most awesome day you've ever had. It's totally cool. What's going on? And actually, mean it when you ask someone for additional information. So, again, active listening is the process of repeating back your understanding to the person that you're in dialogue with to make sure that you actually have mutual understanding. What's shocking about the practice of active listening, at least in my own experience, is how often I have spoken to someone and said, what I'm hearing you say is the following, and summarize what they've had to say, and to have had them respond, actually, that's not what I meant at all. And it's been completely surprising to me because I think I'm a very good communicator, and yet I've been consistently shown that human communication is fraught with difficulty. And so slowing it down and actually making sure that you just understand as a baseline is an incredibly effective tool for exercising empathy. This one is my personal favorite. Read fiction. You can become a more empathetic person just by reading a good book. I think that now in an age of information overload, we're all too often reading cool news headlines or even reading technical documentation to get through our day. But the process of reading fiction creates an environment in our brain where empathy grows wildly. Through the process of understanding human behavior as it's spread out through a novel, by understanding characters' motivations, by actually imagining a scene in our heads, we stimulate the same centers of the brain that are responsible for empathy. So simply understanding what a character is going through, why she may have a particular motivation at a particular time, why he's making the decision to do something that he's doing, all of that helps to build empathy, and all of it in an opportunity to relax and unwind. So visit your local library and/or enjoy your favorite ebook. Be curious and avoid assumptions. How many of us walk into situations where we have to talk to somebody about something that's very difficult, and we've already decided we know what they think? I love the show of hands. I can't count the number of times that I have had to have a difficult conversation at work with a colleague where I understand that their motivations and their needs are completely orthogonal to what I need. And I've gone in kind of tensed up and really, worried, and, I'm assuming it's not going to go well, and maybe we're not going to be friends anymore. And by simply avoiding those assumptions and actually just asking what they want and what they need, the conversation has gone much better. So be curious in your interactions. Don't assume that you already know what the answers are. Ask questions very actively, and ask what are referred to as W questions, right? What do you need? When do you need it by? Why is this what you're asking for? What else would satisfy your needs? Is this the only outcome that will really work for you? What are you trying to accomplish? If you only ask closed questions, right, questions that are only answerable with a yes or a no, you lose out on the opportunity to learn that much more about what the person that you're talking to actually needs. Maybe what they think they need is much more congruent with what you are actually able to provide than both of you realize. All right, and be explicit and inclusive in your values. The most important way to exercise empathy in an organization is to be completely and totally transparent about what expectations are. All too often, we have these unwritten codes of conduct around culture, and no one really knows how to be successful because there are a whole bunch of unwritten rules like, well, if you really want to succeed here, you need to play golf with the CEO. Or if you really, really want to do well here, then the most important thing that you can do is be buddies with so-and-so. None of that's written down. None of that is actually transmitted to everyone. There's no level playing field when the organization's values aren't explicit. And furthermore, you would find if someone actually said to you, so the only way to succeed here is to play golf with the CEO, like, no one would ever have that as an actual value for their company because they would be embarrassed to say it out loud. They'd realize that was kind of silly, right? It's human nature, but it's silly. So take the opportunity when you're creating a team or creating any project to actually be very clear about what's important to you, why it's important to you, and how people can show that it's important in their behavior, right? And be very inclusive in your values. Some of the most successful open source projects have created mission statements that talk about the inclusivity that they exercise in their community, welcoming everyone from janitors to interpretive dancers to folks who have never coded before to folks submitting their 1,000th patch. And those are some of the most actively developed projects on GitHub now. So again, be very, very clear about what is important to you and be very, very clear that everyone is welcome. Because if people don't realize that you value them, if it's not completely clear to them that there is a place for them in what you're doing, they won't take a seat at the table. People need to be told that their time and their work is valued and that you want them to join you. Discourage hippoing. Anyone know the term hippo besides the cool animal? Yes, sir. What is hippoing? Very nice. Highest paid person's opinion. The idea that the person in the room who makes the most money is the only person's opinion who actually matters. How many of you have been to hippo meetings? How many of you wanted to leave the hippo meeting? How many of you knew if you left the meeting, the hippo would get mad at you? Yes, exactly. I also want to expand this acronym not to just be the highest paid person's opinion, but also the highest prestige person's opinion. Sometimes this isn't necessarily just about cash. It's about how much gravitas a person has actually accumulated over the course of their career. That's particularly important, I think, in open source projects when you talk to folks who are like terrified to question a maintainer's opinion on a particular feature, right? So discourage hippoing in your organization, your project, your collaboration. So if you are in a room and you are the highest prestige or highest paid person, don't spend all of your time talking. Spend much more of your time listening. Ask lots of questions. Ask lots of W questions. Why are we doing this way? What are some of the other ways that we could solve this problem? What is our ultimate goal with what we're doing? And if you are able to, again, this is really about being a leader, right? If you're one of those people who is not the highest paid person's opinion, it's not like you can sort of look over and say, so, I know that you are fancy pants, but perhaps you could talk less. Yeah, exactly. Then you're gonna have one of those reactions right there. It's gonna be not very pleasant. But again, as leaders, recognize your power. Recognize your power in the room, recognize your power in an organization, and make sure that you are inviting everyone to contribute effectively to the dialogue. And this can be really messy, right? Like when we're empowered to all share our thoughts and our opinions, it can be incredibly difficult to kind of maintain order and in the process of building consensus, right? Messy consensus is messy for a reason. So if you're looking for ways to think through how you can do that, I would highly recommend a book called The Open Organization that talks about the principles of bringing open source projects to working with business processes and kind of having that whole process of everyone's able to contribute to the dialogue in order to build a better outcome. Don't flip the bozo bit. Okay, is anyone familiar with the term bozo bit? Excellent, I see one hand. Would you like to define bozo bit? You don't have to if you don't want to. Okay, never mind, I will define bozo bit, it'll be great. I'm going to summarize that as don't judge a person completely by their failure. If they fail one time, that's not just it. Excellent. So the term bozo bit is actually from a book called The Dynamics of Software Development, which is a classic tome, and it's been with us since 1995, coined by a gentleman named Jim McCarthy. And the idea was precisely this, that if somebody says something that is not the smartest thing you've ever heard, they'll never be given the opportunity to come back from that because they go from like cool, competent person to bozo, complete idiot, disregard everything this person has ever said. We don't want to hear from them anymore. And this is harmful for any number of reasons, but let's start with some actual hard data. So Google recently completed a study on all of their employees to figure out what made people successful. Ultimately, they were trying to prove or disprove the idea that managers matter. Like, Google was a huge organization with a very flat hierarchy. Certain managers had hundreds of people reporting to them. There wasn't a real effective manager-employee relationship there. And as part of this, they also spawned a new study called Project Aristotle to understand what the key components were for successful teams. And they discovered that the most important factor was what they termed psychological safety. The idea that you are able to speak your mind, share ideas, give raw thoughts to the group, and that it would be okay to do so, that you didn't have to be afraid of the repercussions of saying something that was raw or ill-formed or even just completely incorrect because you were contributing to the dialogue. And that psychological safety was the key factor in team successes. It wasn't the seniority of the people on the team. It wasn't their manager. It wasn't that they had some amazing computer scientist who invented some amazing programming language, et cetera, et cetera. It was simply that you were able to feel safe when expressing your thoughts. So I know that it's difficult when someone says something silly, especially if they say many silly things, to continue to engage in a productive dialogue with them, right? But remind yourself, don't flip the bozo bit, right? We all have bad days. We all make mistakes. We all have areas where we're not that great at something. And, looking for opportunities for this person to be able to productively contribute to your team in a different way is wonderful. And it's also bad for the person who's getting the bit flipped, right? I mean, I've been the bozo in the room, right? When I say something and I think, wow, that was not the most amazing thing I've ever said. And, everybody kind of gets quiet and sort of looks the other way and takes a sip of their coffee. And, that's damaging for the person that it happens to, right? They feel less inspired to contribute later. And they may have the best possible idea to solve your problem, but they don't feel comfortable saying it. They've felt that their psychological safety has been removed. Now, and it's also very important to make the point that there are times when someone is ill-suited to the task that has been given to them. And I've had actually someone stand up in the middle of this presentation one time and say, what if they really are a bozo and you just need to get rid of them? And I felt bad for that gentleman because he clearly had a colleague who was giving him a bad day. It is true that there are some times that people really ought not to do the things that they are doing, and you're in a much better position being very clear with them that that is what is going on. There's a management practice called radical candor, in which managers are just completely honest with their employees about their strengths and their weaknesses and what they think they can improve and what they think they just should avoid doing because it's just not what they're good at. And that has proven to be much, much more effective than sort of sitting around going, I'm just going to ignore you and hope you go away. And make it truly okay to fail. I've been to lots of DevOps Days conferences. It's great. We talk about fail fast, recover quickly. How many of you hear this as a mantra in your workplace all the time? I see a few hands. That's very encouraging. How many of you have been told it's okay to fail and then you get punished for failing? How many of you, after you get punished for failing, say, of course it's okay to fail, and then never take risks again? Excellent. In order to make it truly okay to fail, you need to codify failure into your culture. You need to make it a part of what you do. I've seen this done a number of different ways at different companies, but I think my favorite was the expectation that as part of your performance review, if you didn't fail to achieve one of your 3 key goals, you weren't eligible for promotion because you weren't setting your goals high enough, so high that you weren't able to achieve them, right? The idea that what you were trying to do was so amazingly awesome that there was no way you were going to get it done. But at least if you got 2/3 of the way there, what you'd accomplished was so great and contributed so much to the organization that clearly you were making the right decisions, thinking big, and doing really spectacular stuff, right? And that's just it. Instead of being punished for failure, the expectation was if you were not failing, you were not doing your job, right? And again, part of this whole process of making it okay to fail is that exercise of empathy. Nobody wants to fail if the result of failure is to be treated badly or to have folks, not want to engage with you or flip the bozo bit, right? If someone fails, it's okay to fail. There's nothing wrong with it, right? We fail every day. That's why we work in an industry that has bugs. If we weren't surrounded by failure, none of us would have jobs. That would be bad. Has anybody heard of the fail cake? Oh, a couple of people have heard of the fail cake. The fail cake is truly awesome. So there are several folks who basically, whenever there is a truly spectacular problem, and they're going to do a retrospective, because let's stop calling them postmortems, nobody died. When they're going to do a retrospective and figure out why something went terribly, terribly wrong, someone is assigned to make cake, usually the person who would be blamed for what went wrong. And they bring in cake to the office, and everyone sits around, and they eat cake, and they talk about why there was an issue, why there was a problem. And let's face it, it is really hard to be upset and say mean things to other people while you're eating cake. I have never heard of any cake throwing, but if anyone has, let me know. I will incorporate that into future pitches. So again, everyone's standing around, people are taking a meal together. That's a very human bonding, connective moment, right? And what's documented is what went wrong, how do we fix it, how can we make it better next time? And there's no blame, there's no finger pointing, there's no angst, right? It's an opportunity for people to reflect in a really positive environment and bringing everyone together so that they can share collective wisdom. So those are my tips for how to cultivate empathy and how to be more successful with your team and collaboration and to be gentle and kind to yourself as well. So this is Finger Questions Guy. I've been told that we need to have questions because we need to play with the catch box. So are there any questions? If not, I will ask you questions and throw the speaker. It will be amazing. All right, so the catch box. According to the instructions on the catch box, I'm supposed to have read the user manual and understand it before and inform others of proper usage, so we're already violating the manual. To avoid injury, do not throw at anyone's head. Make sure those around are aware of the situation. So I want to make sure that you are all aware that this is a mobile speaking unit, and when you catch it, you can speak into it and you can ask a question, or you can simply do something else. So I'm going to suggest that it would be really great if we did a quick round of people talking about their favorite aspect of CodeMotion today until someone comes up with a question. I'm going to throw this to my friend Kareem, because if I hit him in the head, he'll probably forgive me. And I didn't hit him in the head.
Well done. I think the best part about CodeMotion today was seeing all the cultural stuff. Code changes the technology we use, but it's people that build it.
Very cool.
And talks like this help.
Thank you. Pass it on. We'll do 5. Woohoo! Serve it through the crowd.
Okay, I really enjoyed myself at CodeMotion. Many great talks, many great meeting great people. So thank you very much.
Very cool.
So far, what I like about CodeMotion, I like the networking area where it's a lot of space, and when everyone is in the networking area, it's not crowded, especially with this weather. So I like that there's a lot of room to do the networking without getting a lot of humid activity around it.
Very cool. Oh, somebody hugged the speaker box. It's sad. Woohoo!
Yes, thank you. Alex, I have a question. How can we incorporate this in our schools?
That's an excellent question. I think that I'm going to give you a very lawyerly answer, and I apologize for that in advance. The answer is it depends. I'm most familiar with the American school system, which has no empathy at all, and I would like to recommend against it. With all due apologies to my best friend who's a teacher. So I think that there are quite a few ways where empathy could be more effectively exercised as part of the educational system, and I think that there are certain institutions that are trying to do that, right? So an understanding of different learning styles, I think, is a key component of empathy, right? So some people are auditory learners. Sitting there listening to a lecture like this one is a great way for them to absorb information. That's wonderful. And that's the typical style, right? Like, Socratic, somebody's standing up here telling you a bunch of amazing things. But then there are people who are visual learners, and without visual cues, they're not going to absorb information, and they can just be completely lost in that sort of environment. So there are different ways that folks are incorporating different types of technical tools into the classroom. So there may be a lecture format, but then there's like activities or applications on a mobile device or a tablet that are also useful as well. Then there are people who are experimenting with stuff like MOOCs, massive online courses, which are pretty cool, which allow for more teacher-student interaction, though it's via chat, but since it's distributed, it's easier. I don't know, I now admit, I should probably learn about this. I have a new little one. I know nothing about the Dutch school system, so I'm not going to attempt to pontificate about the local school system because that would be silly and I would fail terribly.
Okay, thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, hello.
It's on.
Yeah. How do you incorporate this empathy in organization, or try to push this empathy approach in organizations where it is not seen very positively, or in organizations that are very unempathetic and which are possibly going to reject your approach with summary, how do you say, judgment?
That is an excellent question. I don't have a very satisfying answer but I will tell you what I did. So I have been engaged with various organizations where empathy was not a core value. In fact, empathy was deeply discouraged, right? And it certainly wasn't supported at the management level, and so of course that percolates down to the the rank and file folk, right? I chose to continue to display and exercise empathy because I think leading by example is really important. So if somebody had a spectacular failure, I would be like, wow, okay, so today is not your day, no problem. Like, so what did we learn from this? And move on, right? And also, I was fortunate enough to be in a position as a manager, so I could at least encourage empathetic behavior in the people who worked for me. But not everyone is in that position. Frankly, the end result was I left. I wasn't able to really effectively contribute to an organization where there was like a highly competitive, very combative work culture, right? Like it did not work well for me to have people ridiculed when they made a mistake or ignored when they had wisdom to offer because someone had decided that they didn't know enough to talk about that particular topic, right? Because like if you're in the marketing organization, clearly you can't tell us about our technical documentation just because the software failed to build when you use all the steps in the technical documentation. It's your fault because you're not technical. Like it didn't work, right? And unsurprisingly, that company did not fare well, and they are not in business anymore, so it was good that I left, because I had another gig, and that was great. We have time for one more Be Nice to the Speaker box. Chat box, excuse me, it's called the chat box. It's very exciting.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. I like the talks. The most inspiring thing for me is just to see the people working in the industry, and just some of the companies are startups, so I just get some knowledge or information from them, and it's pretty nice. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Does anyone have something that they think is very important to say to our chat box? Because if not, I have an important announcement. Well, I think it's a very important announcement. So how many of you realize that there are really cool t-shirts with the CodeMotion emblem on them out there that you can get for free in the lobby? Okay, there are not enough hands up because that is a really cool shirt, and I have boxes and boxes of conference t-shirts, but I actually got this shirt. So you should go talk to the nice folks out in the lobby as you leave to get your super groovy red CodeMotion shirt. And that is my super important announcement. I'm just going to close with saying my favorite part of the event so far, in addition to the incredibly high quality program content, this is the most women I have seen at any technical conference in my 16 years of working in this industry. Good job, guys. Excuse me, good job, humans. You did great.